Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to see us today. I'm Luis Lopez, Los Angeles County Commissioner, and also a proud Front Range Passenger Rail Director. We're here today for a discussion and a presentation with Andy Karzian and Chrissy Bright. So I know we don't have a flag, but can we just please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance? If you could.
Commissioner Lopez, I have one right here.
There you go, Commissioner. And Mayor Rico, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, we'd just like to go around the room so everybody has introductions, and we'll start in here with our media. Please introduce yourselves.
Tom Murphy, Trinidad Times TV, and Malaire Murphy Funeral Home.
Jerry Peters, the Los Angeles County Republican Party.
Ty Winter, House District 47 representative.
Federico Mayor.
Felix Lopez, County Commissioner.
Donna Sue Torres with South Central Council of Governments.
Jennifer Oliver with South Central Council of Governments.
Kay Davis, City of Walsenburg.
John Galusha, Warfield County Commissioner.
We save the best for last, John.
And I've known Andy since he was only 6 foot.
Well, if Andy, the 6-foot man, would so gladly come up here and take over the meeting. Andy and Chrissy, thank you.
Yeah. You know, before we actually get started, this is probably cheating. Can I get a quick photo of everybody? Is that okay?
Yeah, before you all leave, once I start talking, because that's usually what happens. So we want to capture the before.
Yeah, hop in there. Let's get a quick photo, and then we can get going.
What do you want, against the wall here or right here?
Oh, I mean, if you're willing to stand up and get a photo, let's get a real photo, right? Well, if I don't do it now, I'm gonna forget, and I spent all week telling Andy we need a photo, so. Oh, it is starting to rain. It's kind of exciting.
With the ladies up front.
Yeah.
Perfect. This is fun, people. And a half wall, half not wall. Mayor Rico. Okay, ready? Over here. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thank you all so much. All right, 89, you can actually do your presentation.
Thank you. Now we can prove that we were here.
Well, that's what that was.
That's what, like to the rest of our board.
In there?
Would they see our expenses?
I didn't see the newspaper with today's date on it though.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. All right, this is so formal. I'm probably going to be moving around, so I'll be back and forth. But first off, I wanted to thank you for being here. Thank you so much. I know this is a new conversation, not so new for some. I'm here only because of the work that has been done in the past. We're building upon the prior efforts. I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that is new and what we're building upon, and then kind of where we would like to go. I'll preface it all as this is a long-term effort, right? We're not going to be getting trains tomorrow, but we want to move the needle so that not only do we continue having a conversation, serious conversations about this at the federal, state, and local level, but ideally we move it enough so that we can start service and start building upon developing a new system of transportation along the Front Range. And I think that is ultimately the goal of what we would like to do, right? So with that said, what is the Front Range Passenger Rail District? It's a new district. It creates a new district that was created by the legislature 2 years ago. The actual district became an entity, a new special district last year on July 1st. We are a special district. We are a local government. We aren't a traditional special district like you would think, like a fire protection district or a wastewater district. We're a larger district, but essentially operate as just a really large special district up and down the Front Range. The border is border to border, northern border to southern border, incorporates all 13 counties of the Front Range. The starter service, what we're looking to do is from Pueblo to Fort Collins along existing tracks to try and keep those costs down and get something started to build upon. But the intent and the goal for the whole district is to build it out beyond that initial starter service down to Trinidad, up to Cheyenne, maybe down into New Mexico as well, right? So I'll talk more about who is on my board I think, here in a few slides. The benefits and the goals and the values that we bring and what we want to continue doing and building into this process, and the reasons for this is reliable travel. Obviously for you all traveling north, and for those who want to come down south, a reliable sense of travel, like we've been talking about before. When it snows, it's a more reliable option. It doesn't rely, or it isn't impacted by the accidents on I-25 and whatnot. Connected communities is a huge reason why we're continuing to have the conversation. Connecting from the federal view, the markets, right? We want to obviously connect to the tourism possibilities of Trinidad to Pueblo and beyond. Healthcare, higher ed, football games, basketball games, tourism opportunities, new state park. All of these are opportunities for ridership for passenger rail that we would build into future conversations in the future system. And then the last two, of course, with the economic vitality economic vitality, sustainable growth, both of which kind of come from the development of passenger rail, the economics around a station. Right? Building a station improvement district is an opportunity or an option for the Front Range passenger rail communities. What that looks like, we don't know yet. All right, so we're still having conversations about what that could entail, but the work that you all are doing down along where the Amtrak platform station is now, expand off of that, right? Opportunities to build economic development around that. And then, of course, the sustainable growth. We all know that the Front Range is growing, and this is just a key opportunity for us to build in a new transportation option for that, the sustainable growth for the community as we continue forward. You all know this. You've been intimately connected with the conversations moving forward with the Front Range passenger rail, the history of it, distinctly and directly connected with the Southwest Chief. All the conversations around the Front Range rail in this district stemmed from the work on the Southwest Chief, developing the through car study, working with Amtrak to try and develop the coming into Pueblo and connecting to Pueblo, the Zephyr, the Southwest Chief coming in through La Junta and into Trinidad, and then possibly connecting to Pueblo and developing those economic opportunities. The Rail Commission, the Southwest Chief Rail Commission, then took a look at that, and then the district is the legal and existing creation and what's the word I'm looking for, the entity that took over for the commission. There's a word for it, legal. We inherited all of the work that the commission did. Also, what we inherited from the commission was the service development plan, and I'm going to speak to that. That's the federal document that we need to complete before we start building track, before we start running the rails, and I'll get into that here in a second. A little bit more about the district. So there's a map of the district. So you can see it goes border to border, Trinidad up to Fort Collins. The charge to the district is to finance, design, construct, operate the passenger rail along the Front Range of Colorado. It's a narrow scope, right? Not much to it. A big part of what we need is funding. And a big part of that funding is going to be stable, consistent funding to help a railroad operate, right? It's the same conversation that we always have with transportation. To get that, we're going to need a ballot measure because of Tabor and who we are here in Colorado. So that is, we think, a 4-year time frame in order to build the political ground game necessary in order to pass a ballot measure for the stable transportation funding, or for the stable funding for the district. We don't know what that looks like yet. We're having conversations about some of the values that we want for the district to enter into that conversation. And then again, I'll speak to some of those later as well. Ultimately, even though, as I said this before, it's a large special district, this is a local government. It is, at its core, a local government. It is not a state-run agency. It's not a statewide agency. It's a special district local government. So for me, coming from local government, as Commissioner said, that's how I approach this whole conversation, is with local governments. You all are the ones that are going to be writing this. You all are determining where the stations are. It is a local government driven conversation. And if we can't get buy-in from you all and from your constituencies, then we shouldn't be doing this, because that's what it is.
So Andy, as you go through the process, I hope it's okay to ask a question.
Please, yeah, absolutely. I would much rather have a packet.
You're speaking about the 13 county special district.
Yep.
And what happens if a county, for whatever reason, declines to be part of that special district? And so that's question number one. And then my second question is, we have had so many taxes in the state of Colorado. We have the transportation bill that's taken a few $1 billion. We now have 303 on the table that who knows what that could do. That is also going to be a multi-billion-dollar impact to our taxpayers. So my second part of the question is, how much is it going to cost? And for a population like ours here in Los Animas County, we can't compete with Fort Collins.
Yeah. I understand. Nope, you're right. So I can't answer your questions. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how much. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I recognize that it's not going to be easy, right, to pass a ballot measure in this district. Our hope is that your constituents recognize the values that we bring, not only a direct access to the station, but if your county doesn't have direct access to stations or the rail, an increase in opportunities for multimodal connections to this new option, or what other values can we bring to the county and build out. So those are all options that can still happen, and nothing is set in stone on that. So I think there's a couple of opportunities for us. We can get creative at a local level to try and build something that benefits the local communities. We have availability of capital that we did not have before that can reduce costs to our constituents in the district, and we're going to try and maximize that as much as possible. I'm going to speak to that here in a second. And then just really good planning and groundwork, I think, on our end to help communicate to your constituents and to you all what it is that we are bringing to you. But I'm under no illusion, Commissioner. I know this is going to be a difficult lift for some communities.
And then again, the ridership, I hope it's going to be compensated, because in Los Animas County, there's no way, I think, if it's going to be on a daily basis between here and Huérfano and south of Pueblo, we're going to be able to provide the amount of ridership required to, and then now, unquote, justify. And so if we have 10 people getting on that, I mean, is that justifiable? But then I'm actually now asking for a subsidy from larger counties for us to have that. So I'm thinking in terms of numbers, because that's what I do for a living.
Absolutely.
And so how much is it going to cost me, and how much is it going to cost my constituents?
Yeah.
Well, Felix, if you look at the ridership component of this, is that it's not only coming from here to Pueblo, it's the ridership going from Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver, all the way down to Albuquerque, and also in reverse. So that is where the ridership is, that's where it has to get built from.
And to answer, if I may, Andy, to get out of the district, I think would take an act of Congress to remove us, amend the resolution, or amend the bill, the initial bill that came down. I think that'd probably be the only way to get out of the district if you chose.
I think it's an act of God.
Yeah. That probably won't happen. But we are developing through Bustang, and Aaron's not here today, but can you report on the numbers a little bit, Jennifer, on what our ridership? Because that's going to help promote Front Range.
Right. I mean, this is ridership between Trinidad and Pueblo with the new CDOT Bustang Outrider program. We started, I think it was March 28th or the 23rd. We've already surpassed 100 riders, which is way more than we thought. And the number one route is Trinidad to Pueblo, Pueblo to Trinidad. But we are also seeing Walsenburg to Pueblo and vice versa. So that has surpassed our expectations in terms of ridership. And to speak along those lines, kind of tagging on to what Mayor Rico said, is that I see the potential with the connection between the Southwest Chief and the California Zephyr with Amtrak. Because right now, the Southwest Chief stops here in Trinidad, but then it goes on off to Chicago, and to get to Denver, you gotta go to Chicago and then back. So that's a huge selling point, I think, especially for people that need to get here. And if Fisher's Peak becomes kind of this destination, there's the outdoor economic development piece, which is kind of a huge thing right now too. So I see a lot of potential with this. And I don't think that would necessarily usurp the bus standing system, because there might be different, I don't know what kind of stops we'll be looking at, because we stop in Walsenburg, Colorado City, and in Trinidad. But, it's nice to have options and affordable options. And, if a train gets you there faster and you don't need to make all those intermediate stops, then that's great too.
Well, one component of actual ridership that goes along with that are veterans that are traveling between here in Albuquerque and here and even Denver to get service, and especially in the wintertime. As we know, there's around 1,600 vets in the county. Rail is more reliable and time-wise, even though, the biggest thing is the last mile. That's the thing that needs to be worked out.
So all of these, tourism is, I think, going to be a major draw for the passenger rail line along the Front Range. Connection to other Amtrak markets and being able to come into Denver and or other cities along the Front Range passenger rail route. Chrissy and I are having conversations with other corridors around the country on how they've developed, how they are developing or what they've done in the past, and how their ridership has changed since COVID. Because you can imagine during COVID, transit ridership plummeted. What a lot of people are saying now is that ridership is coming back, but not in the traditional models that we saw before, much more around tourism. Because people are working in their homes and they're staying in their places during the week, but they want to get out during the weekends. And so the ridership models have been flipped, and it's much larger on the weekends, hitting sporting events, tourist destinations, right? Overnights in different towns and whatnot. So that's our hope, that we can build that as well as like higher education, right? With kids coming down from a variety of different places and coming home and whatnot. So we don't see this as a traditional, Chicago to Denver Amtrak route, but it's going to be much more of that kind of focused, interesting, where do we develop? And it would be fascinating to see kind of what is the outrider ridership? Who is riding the buses that are the good ridership numbers that you have now? And can we market to them? Can we make that a ridership model?
And what surprised us is that we're seeing a lot more than we anticipated from people in Pueblo coming down to Trinidad for the day. Like they'll come down on one route, stay for the day, have lunch, and then ride back. And that was kind of an unanticipated consequence. Like we figured everyone would be coming from here to go up there to go to doctor's appointments.
Right. Yeah.
It was very centric around that. But we're seeing that people are coming down to check out Walsenburg and Trinidad, and then heading back up to Pueblo in the same day. So it opens up some new things that maybe we didn't anticipate.
Have you guys looked at what the Rail Runner does between Santa Fe and
Yeah, and he's actually on our board. Yeah, like we were talking about, yes. I have not been down there yet to take a look at it, but I want to, absolutely.
It'd be interesting to see how that has worked out over the years that they've had it.
Yeah, it's a great model because it's kind of that smaller starter service dedicated for that specific area. Good, thank you. I appreciate the questions. This last bullet point I think is really important as well. We talked about the funding for this, and with the infrastructure bill that passed, I think 3 years ago now, from the federal level, dedicated literally billions of dollars to efforts like this to develop brand new passenger rail corridors from around the country. And I will speak to it here in a second, but there's a new program being developed by the Federal Rail Administration, CIDP, I'll talk about it, where if we are accepted into that program, we get access to these billions of dollars. And that's billions of dollars for planning, for working with the railroads, and capital construction. So we will have a better opportunity frankly, than others around the country to get actual dollars to further the efforts for what it is
Is
we're
that
talking
the
about.
$66 billion that the feds had allocated last year?
Yep. And I think there's $12 billion specific for this CIDP program, where, and again, I'll get into it, but it's a 10-90, 90-10 match, where we come $10, they give us 90, or up to 90, right? With no limit, like no ceiling. And so that's a wonderful opportunity, especially for us, because we are already in our service development plan. We're ahead of the game in terms of coordination with the feds, working with the freight railroads who are on my board, Amtrak's on my board. So it's a real great opportunity for us to kind of take the lead in this process and have people see what it is we're doing, while hopefully recognizing we get a lot of the money. We'll see.
So Andy, before you change that slide,
Yeah.
if I may.
Yeah, please.
So the width of the special district in Huérfano, Los Animas, and part of Pueblo is that like 10 miles each side of I-25 or something like that?
I think it's 5 miles? 5 miles on each
Five
side.
on each side.
Yep, yep. And we are developing, part of a requirement for us is we're gonna have to develop a map of the district. So working with all your counties and your county clerks and GIS on all that, because we gotta know who the registered electors are in the district, right? So at a minimum, we gotta figure out those borders, and we haven't done that yet, but that's gonna be something that we have to do in order to move forward, with
And then so your one local funding option will probably be sales tax as opposed to property tax, right?
Probably, with all the conversations around property tax and everything that's going on, I don't think politically we're gonna wanna have that conversation. There's other, like, the governor doesn't wanna have that conversation either. So I don't think we're gonna do property tax. But at the same time, sales tax is also problematic in some areas around the district, right?
Right.
So we're trying to approach this from a diverse funding point of view. I don't want it to be all sales tax. I really don't, because then the recession hits, and I've got no money coming into the district, just like what happened with the Regional Transportation District up in Denver. So we want to try and make it as diverse as possible. What that looks like, we don't know. We don't know how much it costs. So to get to your point, Commissioner, right, we are developing those costs right now. A big issue for me, and I'm kind of jumping around on this, but it doesn't matter. The big issue for me is for this 180 miles for the corridor, what do we need to build? I don't know that yet. And so what we need to build, we need sidings, we'll need stations, we'll need X, Y, and Z. We need some safety measures, positive train control in many places. That's $100 million plus in Denver, at least. So I need to be able to quantify what the capital costs are before I'm able to go and think about how we finance it and whatnot. I'm doing that right now. As a matter of fact, I just signed a contract for a consultant to help us out with that, in order to try and figure out then strategically what do we do with our local government partners, with the CRISI grant, RAISE grant, XYZ grant, how do we build it all together, and where do we fit it along the corridor, all ideally with the goal of maximizing those federal dollars to reduce the ask to.
Well, and thank you for all the work you're doing. We have representatives from the entire state. That's really appreciated. Heavy lift. As Commissioner Galusha mentions, I'm speaking of, you're speaking capital construction, that's going to be one set of dollars. And then you have controlled maintenance, ongoing expenses, which now you have to plan for, and right-of-ways, easements, and or property acquisition, which we'll get into. I mean, this is going to be, and that's what I'm saying. And then the deadline is when?
No deadline.
Okay.
But we're pushing as quickly as possible.
Okay.
And I'm happy to talk more about the eminent domain or acquisition. Because we are focusing on existing lines, we do not plan on ever using eminent domain.
Man, I vouch for that.
And that's what I wanted to bring up. We're talking about partners, we're talking about commissioners, cities, but we're not talking about landowners along the route. And how the people that are gonna vote on this, that are in condensed areas, how their vote's gonna affect people that own land along the rail. And that's, I've heard that constantly as being a representative before that. The ranchers, private property owners, they want to know that they're not going to have any land taken by eminent domain, that they're not going to have zones where their cattle can't run up against it. They just want to make sure that they're kept whole, and that's the biggest concern of the ranchers. I mean, because you figure from Trinidad all the way until that, you get to Colorado Springs, that's farm and ranch land all along I-25, and I guess that would be the biggest concern, and we've heard it in this county too. For full clarity, our ranch runs along the rail from the Almoro Rest area all the way to the Black Hills. Fourth generation ranch, and that's a concern when, at one time we heard a mile, there's gonna be a mile easement that they're gonna take, or a mile of eminent domain. That cuts your ranching ability down to nothing. So, and that's just not a concern of ours, that's been a concern of ranchers up and down the corridor. So, and that's what my point was, is, we're talking about all these other groups. We gotta make sure that we, and we have this discussion up in the Capitol.
Yeah.
So Representative Winter, I'm in that 5 miles as well, my property. And the board's had many discussions on this since we've been brought together. That, Andy said it correctly, that is the furthest thing from our thought process right now is property rights, private property rights on folks. And that's one thing we want to try to avoid. That's what we're going to need your help, getting money from the federal government, using that leverage from our existing rails for BNSF and Union Pacific, and so we can possibly share the right of way, share their track, or whatever we gotta do so we can avoid that.
I think what has to happen is along the rail, what is the right of way that the railroad actually has, the fence lines between, to identify that, to make sure that there's not gonna be any of those type of issues. And I think there's enough room there. Except I know you guys might have properties that are at the fence line, but is there 100 yards, 50 yards, who knows? But I think that needs to be identified.
That's right.
From here all the way to Pueblo especially, so kind of cure that issue.
So that's another funding mechanism that we'll have to either look at in the future with a future SDP, safety development plan, if we need to move to that point, unless we can use the existing rail that's in place now.
Well, what it would do is that it would, if you identify that, let's say there's a, 100 yards on each side of the rail system that's there now, it pretty much would take that headache off of the landowners to say, okay, there's enough room there for the rail to go through. If they have to add another rail, I think that would take a lot of the headache off.
And that's Abby's headache to bring before the board to work with those non-voting board members, which is exactly those rail members, Union Pacific, Burlington, Northern Amtrak. They're all on the board, RTD, but they're non-voting members. I think that was done on purpose.
Absolutely.
So they can't say no or vote no against and stop progress. But that's
At least not on the board.
right.
They could do it on their own.
I have a question in regards to, you're talking about constituents and people within the district. Is the expectation, it was sort of alluded to here, is the expectation that there's a ballot initiative in Huerfano County, there's one in Pueblo, there's one in El Paso County, and it follows, or is it one state initiative that then denudes small rural areas of any voice in what really happens?
I think ideally it's neither, or maybe it's the latter, but I don't want it to have the outcome of what you just described. Right now, statutorily, I believe it would be a district-wide vote on a funding mechanism. And that means Huerfano County would pay the same amount as Denver County. But that's not what we are proposing as the district. What we would like to see is that there's a bit of equity and balance to the financing of the project, because we recognize that there's likely more of a chance for it to be developed within, right now, the service development plan, right, that the FRA is going to bless. Even within that, I would like to see, for example, I can't even point to it, but up in the Denver Boulder metro area, where the infrastructure is already developed and there's more of an opportunity to partner with commuter rail and passenger rail together, a different kind of financing opportunity that focuses more on maybe that type of transit than coming down here, but it gets to the projects if in Los Animas County and Huerfano County, it's a total of $100 million worth of capital construction in order to get a basic service ridership started, then maybe we can figure out a financing mechanism for $100 million for this portion of it, or something like that. That's how we're approaching it. We are not approaching it as a one-size-fits-all. Unfortunately, that's the way it is right now in statute, but part of our legislative strategy for the next year is to take a look at that, and we're just gonna start having those conversations. But my treasurer, and our finance committee, of which Commissioner is on, if you want to speak to kind of what we've been discussing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I asked to be put on the finance committee on purpose, because, for exactly that question. How do we protect the residents of Los Animas and Huerfano County without having a taxation, without representation? Basically, if we're gonna have a tax on it, we better have training, right? So what's the proportionate amount we pay? It's gonna be a ballot measure. We don't know what that is yet. We're not there yet. But I am on that position, on that committee, purposely to protect the residents of Los Animas and Huerfano County on that financial obligation in particular. And so I've always been a person that says more brains are better than one, and with these five of us on the finance committee, we've got some really sharp guys on that. And I think we'll come to a good conclusion to present to the board. So any input from you guys, please bring it towards me so I can present it to the finance committee and then we present it to the board as a whole. But at the end of the day, if we have to find the funding how to get this done, this group is put together, can manage that, but we're gonna need a lot of help. But you will not be, and the residents of Los Animas, Huerfano County, and thank you, COG, for pointing me to that work, will not be taken advantage of in any way as long as I'm on this committee and on this board. Now, if you kick me off the board,
You're not there yet.
Oh, you know, one of the things is, you know, the way the statute is written is that up to 0.08% of the sales tax. And I think that's too high, and I really believe that it should be somewhere in the 0.045, because what's gonna happen is that the sales tax that we have here now, as high as it is that if we have to bring another tax measure for any other particular purpose, either the community or the county or whatever, and even other, you know, like you guys, work from the county, keep it low enough for the smaller areas so that we can add that tax down the road. That way the constituents can vote for this, but then also there's some availability for them to have an additional tax if necessary down the road. So I think that's what you guys need to really consider.
yeah, and our half-cent sales tax in Los Animas County brings in $1.4 million a year. Just to give you an estimate, what our community brings in on a half-cent. So 0.8, when you bring that up to almost double that. So is that what we need in this area? That's what I can bring to this board, let them know what kind of our funding, what we have in place now, and also that concern that can our residents of Huerfano, Los Animas County afford that additional on their service and goods and everything they purchase. So that'll be going to the topic now in the bigger cities, the Springs, Denver, Fort Collins, and so forth. Imagine a 0.2% sales tax. It's going to be millions and millions and millions of dollars. So that comment's been brought up before too by some other board members in the past that why should the North pay for the South? And I think I made the comment that why do you apply for the EIF grants when you have no energy impact in Boulder? So we have to work, and we've overcome that as a board. We really have. That was about a year ago that conversation happened, Andy. And now we're all in consensus, I believe, that we're going to get this done from state line to state line. But to protect the taxpayer, again, that's why I'm on this committee, and whatever concerns that the city council has regarding the sales tax, when we get to that point, I will come and update the city council as well as I update my county commissioners.
That's why I tried to get on the commission, because I felt like, and was not fortunate to get on there, and I felt like Trinidad, every other community has at least 2 members from their communities on this commission. Trinidad only has 1, you.
And
I felt
biggest
that
word
would
we have.
have been
I mean,
nice.
he
to have
counts
that
as
too.
2.
I'm as big as you.
Yeah, you guys have 0, you're right. But I felt like we needed more representation down here.
Danae Escar would be the one to contact on that. She drafted the bill. She's the one that was the legislature we were handed.
One of the U.S. and the perspective and the way you explain, is it going to be one special district? I'd rather the citizens and residents of that district are the ones that approve something Because if we leave it up to adjacent counties, you pay tax Huérfano County all, as long as you don't touch me. That's gonna be unfair
Absolutely.
representation, so I think the voice should come from this. And I know we have a strong voice in Commissioner Lopez, he gives us updates on and on. We have this perspective of, this is where powers and authorities of citizens are impacted and taken away by the voice of some foreign county that really has nothing to do with it, so.
Yep. Understood.
So on that note, actually, I have wondered since the beginning why La Junta wasn't included in the district, because really this bloomed from the Southwest Chief, discussion. So it would have seemed to me reasonable to include a strip down Highway 50 to La Junta, to include the Southwest Chief.
That question did come up and never did get a clear answer on it.
Well,
They started talking.
if you're going back to the legislature, you might have an opportunity.
Unfortunately, it's not the legislature, it's the feds. And so the feds right now are the ones that determine and govern the service development plan under which we are developing everything right now, the ridership, and I'll speak to it here. But they're the ones that define the boundaries on that.
But the legislature set the boundaries for
For the district, absolutely.
So that's what I'm saying, is if you're going back to the legislature to make some modifications to the enabling legislation, you might want to look at changing the boundaries of the district to include Otero County. That's my thought.
What do you think Otero would say about that?
I don't care what they say. They're not here.
It should have gone all the way to the Lamar, to the state line on that other, because Lamar's.
I think one thing that's really important to remember is what we're talking about is getting something running, right? Getting a starter service up and running so that we can build upon that in the future. And we won't be able to build it out with all of the stations and all of the locations that we would like and where all of our constituents would like either as well. And in the beginning, there will be some winners and losers. But our goal is to try and develop enough time, over time, so that we can do spurs. And if Otero wants to join, there's opportunities for it to join, and there are opportunities in the future for expansion.
Have they determined where the stations might be placed? I know there was a lot of talk when I was on the commission all the way from up north, all the way to Pueblo, and there were multiple communities that all wanted stations. There was like 3 of them.
Yeah.
They wanted in Colorado Springs, but
Yeah.
they couldn't get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
have they determined where the stations are going to be at, or could be?
Yep. Yeah, they help. A lot of it is done at the local level. So for example, in Colorado Springs, they're talking about whether they want it closer to the Olympic Park and near the Olympic Center there, or further up north in Monument, because their argument is if we have one in downtown, all of our population center up here in Monument, where there's a big community, suburban, ex-urban community that probably would use this, they're not going to drive 20 minutes south only to join the train and go up north again, right? Fair point. But the district and the feds aren't going to jump into the middle of that conversation. Colorado Springs and Monument needs to figure this out, and we're happy to help facilitate or do whatever, but that's not necessarily the district's.
Well, I think Mayor Rico's asking the bigger picture question of, do we know where the train is gonna stop? I think the micro-sighting happens by local communities, but do we know the major stopping areas yet?
We have a good sense of where it's going.
I
And
think
down
it's-
south here,
I think-
it's pretty
I think it's
self-explanatory.
gonna be early next year, so it's
I
kind
know they were
of.
originally talking about Pueblo, Fort Carson, Air Force Academy, Castle Rock, and it's like within 30 or 40 miles of each other, there was another stop. So all it does is slow down the train.
Yeah.
So I think that's an issue.
That's an important thing to think about, right? It's an intercity service, so it's not meant to be that every few miles, and it's not gonna be that many. It's not initially. There might be secondary stations down the line, but it's gonna be much more major markets.
That would make the most sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So can I ask about the infrastructure law? What kind of feasible funding options are there in terms of the capital and,
That.
am I jumping?
No, there's my board of directors. Just all you need to know on that, it's a big board of
It's a big
directors,
board.
and everybody's on board with it. It is actually really good. We've got the stakeholders there that we need. Obviously, the Council of Governments, you mentioned Danae Escar, in drafting this. They wanted it to be MPOs and Council of Governments who were primarily the movers to appoint the bulk of this board, as opposed to a governor that can come and go and have a political agenda, or, necessarily elected officials at the local level or whatnot. So that was a really, I think, smart idea for them to utilize that. But then also Amtrak, UP, BN, CDOT, right? All of those folks. So it's a comprehensive board, and it's been a fascinating experience to get them together and to get folks, that have been involved with what Mayor Rico did. Jim Subi, Joe Gabler are on my board, Sal Pace is on my board. They all have a broad knowledge of what, got us here, all the way to brand new members that have never even been on a train. So getting them to a common set of assumptions and facts has been a really cool experience.
Is there a term for the board for their appointments?
Yes.
Time period?
What's the duration of the
Yeah.
term of an appointed
Yeah.
board member?
It's a bit convoluted. Most of them are 3-year terms. But for some of the ones that are appointed by MPOs, it's 2 years, so that they're staggered. Some of the governor appointees, 2 years, staggered, but not these others, so it's 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Very quick, I did not ignore after
Oh,
this
no,
slide,
yeah,
I'm gonna get
it's
back
fine.
to what you were talking, so remember your question.
I'll keep asking it.
Good.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
All right, so I briefly talked about the service development plan. This is a process, it's a planning process that we need to undergo to prove to the feds and the FRA that we have done our due diligence in taking a look at our corridor, ridership modeling, financial modeling, working with the freight railroads, right? There's many requirements and very specific steps that they approve as we go through this service development plan that are completely out of our control. The first step was developing a purpose and need statement for the entire plan. That has been blessed by the FRA. The next one will be the outreach efforts. The next one will be modeling efforts and the methodologies associated with that. And so we go through, ultimately what we come out the other end is a strong plan on paper, because we all know what plans on paper and then plans in real life happen. So recognize that. But a strong plan to show that we have gone through the variety of different things here, to start really thinking about what it is that we need to do in order to start this starter service. Please.
With the carbon-free goals set by the state, what are they looking to power this train? Have they had any ideas? What is it going to be additional, or are they?
Yeah, it's a great question. Ideally, what we would want to see and have on the corridor is a hybrid that uses diesel and electric that can switch, and they have those. That would be really cool. They're also
And
really
the Baltimore's
expensive.
really been talking hydrogen.
Yeah, great. If we can get hydrogen,
Yeah.
awesome. I'll be honest with you, what we hear right now is the rolling stock, like actually buying train cars and whatnot, 10 years. If I put my order in today, it's 10 years from today that I'll get the train. I think that will probably change in the next few, right? They're building the capacity in the states. The businesses recognize with these dollars that, there's a demand here, so they're building up in Utah, and I think in California, I believe there's some stations. But, so to answer your question, I think ideally a mix of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so now, Corridor Identification Development Program. This kind of gets to what we were talking about with the funding. This is that big new program that the feds have created specifically for this purpose that we're talking about today. Comprehensive Intercity Planning Program is going to be part of it, as we talked about. Creates that pipeline of projects, millions of dollars in funding, 90-10 match, as we talked about. We applied at the beginning of March as a district. We expect to hear that we have been accepted into the program beginning of October-ish, September, October. That comes with $500,000 as an initial boost for the development of a corridor. As I said, we're already kind of further on down the line, so that 500 grand can do additional outreach efforts, website development, advocacy, the variety of things, financial modeling, further financial modeling, paying for lawyers to do the financial modeling and figure out what we need to do in order to change it at the legislature, because we will be coming to the legislature for changes, whether it's just kind of cleanup language that we need to do, or these larger financing conversations that we're gonna have to have. It's gonna be a fascinating conversation. It's gonna be really interesting. What does it mean to be accepted into this then? So I get accepted, and it's like being accepted into college, right? Rail college. We'll call it that. I just came up with that. So once we get accepted into this program, we are now eligible for those dollars that are available for passenger rail corridor development. If we're not accepted into this program, we are not eligible for those. So it's really important for us to be a part of this program. Again, we've spoken with FRA, Amtrak, our federal delegation, the freight railroads, right, and all of this. So they all say that Colorado and Front Range Passenger Rail is well positioned ahead of the game to be accepted into this, and they honestly are looking at the district for ideas and to see how we move forward so that other emerging corridors can replicate that, you know, when they catch up with where we are. So it's a really exciting thing.
Amtrak's still positioning this district in the priority list, because I know when I left, that was something that was said, is that this area, this district was one of their priority areas.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yep. Yeah, Amtrak would love it if we signed. And frankly, you know, we are going to start as the board taking a look at choosing an operator. Amtrak obviously is a major player in that conversation. I think it's probably going to be BN or Amtrak, just because of that ability for them to be on the freight rails and work with the freight railroads. They have the history of working with the freight rails. They have the statutory authority to be on the rails, other than the other, you know, the other railroads don't. Third party may not. Herzog doesn't have the statutory authority, so BN would be able to say, nope, you can't run. There's no space for you on our railroad. But they can't do that with Amtrak. Now, obviously, there's still a lot of considerations, you know, with Amtrak and the timing and all that, and there's also other negatives associated with signing on with Amtrak. But that's kind of where, to answer your question there, yes, absolutely. In addition to that, what we also just heard, which is interesting, is that if we are accepted into the CIDP program and we choose Amtrak, then now, officially, Amtrak will help us negotiate with the railroads. Amtrak will step in and help us negotiate user agreements, costs, scheduling, you know, these types of things, as that incentive, right, for developing the corridors to choose Amtrak.
When will you find out if you're accepted?
October, hopefully by October this year. And then the next step is we develop a grant within the CIDP for CIDP dollars. And that could be additional planning dollars, it could be administration, it could be operations, that type of stuff to build the corridor. But then we also have the ability to apply for CRISI grants, Federal State Partnership Grant, RAISE grant, other grants that have dedicated pots of money in those for passenger rail through the infrastructure bill. So I wouldn't necessarily be competing with all of the existing corridors around the country that have service now with the federal state partnership, which is the scope of that grant stream. Now with the infrastructure bill, there's a bit more flexibility for these emerging, developing corridors to come in, get some money that's been set aside for them, for like positive train control, or some of these things that change it from freight to passenger rail, which I think is really exciting and provides an opportunity that was not there in the past.
And that's what I mentioned, is that, you know, I think it's essential as we move forward, and that's where you can come in to push the initiative of doing the positive train control between Pueblo and Trinidad, because it put a foothold into the future development and the service development plan if it expands. And I think that's one thing I think that would create a better possibility of getting it down here sooner than later.
At a minimum, that's going to be on the internal project list of the district as something that needs to be paid for and done before, you know, as we do our basic service.
So to be accepted into the CIDP, are you getting any support from the federal delegation, i.e. senators, so on and so forth? At the very least, from the special district?
Yeah.
And preferably the entire federal delegation, so they can get behind these.
We did. I went and visited them in March, was it March? I think it was March, I went and visited and got their buy-in. They supported, it's funny because the FRA was like, please don't bury us in support letters for the CIDP part. We'll get support letters, as we continue along and we get into these larger $100 million asks, right? And we'll need a lot of that federal support as well, but no, absolutely, a key component, and all of them aren't. Well, Bulwark's not, but Bulwark's not much. So she's not necessarily on board with what we're doing, but her political power isn't necessarily a need for what we need, if that makes sense.
Doesn't, but I'll buy it.
Okay. Anything else on CIDP? It's an ongoing, I don't have to reapply every single year. Once you're accepted, you're in. Like I said, it's a 90-10 match, no ceiling. I don't think that means that we're going to realize $1 billion in the first ask. Because another thing that is a bit frustrating for where we are, because of the work that has been done before, and we will have done by the end of the service development plan, I'm ready to start building stuff. Let's go build this. I want to get a grant for a siting here, or blah, blah, boom, boom, boom. Start getting it done, because that shows our constituents we're serious, and we can draw down these dollars, and we can make efforts and progress towards making this happen. And I would like to see that happen significantly before we go to the voters for an ask of any of their money. Like that, I think, is an important thing from a local government level, and I learned that working at CCI. When you all run local government ballot measures, whether at the county or the city municipal level, your constituents need to know what they're paying for, what they get out of it, how long it's going to be, what's the benefit to them. That's the same thing I feel in going to a ballot measure on this. And if we can't provide that information to the public, to your constituents, and if you can't go to your constituents and say, this is what Pueblo gets out of this, why are we running a ballot measure? I think it's going to fail if we can't do that.
And you're also showing them everything else that you've built to make it up. So like you're asking for like a little piece of the huge pie.
Yeah.
So you're getting your money for the infrastructure and the capital projects, and what you have to think about is that ongoing sustainable cost, and that's where the ballot measures come in. That's the money that you need to keep going to supplement those large one-time shot grants, because that's what grants are for.
So overcoming a ballot measure is not going to be as easy up north as you would think, because of an issue that happened years ago with the A-Train. It was A-Train to Boulder.
Northwest Rail, what A-Train, is it A-Train?
So that's the airport train, it's the Beeline.
Beeline. And so they never developed it, but they taxed them on it. And so, we're looking at Boulder County, that it's probably going to be a very uphill battle. So bringing to this board what I've accomplished with my board here in Los Angeles County, we passed 6 ballot measures in that 5-year span, which is unheard of, 70% margin, and asking the voters. So how do we sell those? How do we pass that? By being honest, transparent, showing them what their bang for their buck's going to be, and that's how we'll get this accomplished here on this. And I'll be advocating that to this board. And Andy knows I stand up very firmly when it's when we have these discussions, how we move forward with this. There'll be no smoke and mirrors with this group, because it won't pass if it is, and we know it. So we have to be transparent, tell everybody what they're going to get, when they're going to get it. And so, like Andy said, there's going to be some winners and losers at the beginning, but at the end result, it'll be transparent of when, whether it be stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or however the board decides to move forward, but it'll be definite how we get from point A to point Z before we go to the ballot.
Well, to put it in perspective to some degree, as far as cost goes, just for rail alone, to redo the rail, which will probably have to happen between here and Pueblo and even beyond, it was $1 million a mile, and it's probably higher than that now, so it's going to be.
And I think that includes positive train control and other, is that just track?
No, I think that just tracks. I think the positive train control is.
You can get it cheap. I don't know about that, but yeah, it's going to be a fascinating conversation. And unfortunately, what we're probably going to be seeing in regards to either statutory language or ballot measures is not something that's simple. It's going to be complex, unfortunately, and that scares me as well, because we can't. I haven't been able to figure out a simple way to finance this without it being what you described in the latter, where the small counties are paying the same as the larger, and we don't want to have that. So is it a phased approach where those not getting service don't pay the tax until they start getting service? Or is it, so I don't know what that question is, but it's going to be a complex solution, which doesn't lend itself to easily being interested. Plus, we haven't even started talking about Tabor. I need to de-Bruce the district, right? So that we're able to move forward with, accepting debt and being able to finance some of these projects moving forward. I can't do that now because of Tabor. And so as a special district, I'm gonna have to de-Bruce. But there's some local governments in the district that haven't de-Bruced. So how does a sales tax measure impact them as well into the future? Another big conversation.
That's one of the ballot measures we passed here, we de-Bruce the county.
Yep.
And Andy, as you go through the process, it's gonna be this type of forum in every community, because when the ballot initiative is ready to go out the door, the opposition is gonna come out with their own perspective. And this group is gonna have to be ready to address, because in this particular, in the political climate, money wins. And quite honestly, this whole thing, and if we have a county, us being the Bruce, but then you have a neighbor county that is not, in a sense, even to do the de-Brucing, that's a whole one-line item issue. And be careful not to convolute it with this thing, a sales tax and a de-Brucing, because it's not gonna happen.
I'll even go further. Up in the northern area where transit is a big conversation now because of demographics and politics, how do I, with this huge district, start competing with the metro counties who want to put a ballot measure on their county or municipal ballot to increase transit, or RTD to increase transit? And I think they're thinking about going to the ballot in '24. Well, then I don't want to go to the ballot in '24. If I have to compete with RTD, that's not going to make sense. So my mind, I completely agree with you, Commissioner. This is what I would like to see over the next kind of 2 years of developing the ground game, having the conversations, figuring these things out, coming back to you, explaining what it is that we're doing. That's what I'd like to do. And do it within that time frame so that there's a ballot measure in 2026. That would be my goal. And I think that's doable. It's going to be a push, but I think that's doable. I don't see that happening in 2024 without it being a one-size-fits-all type scenario. But I could be wrong. I'm not the smartest person in the room.
You're absolutely correct. What happens between now and whenever this ballot initiative hits the streets, I think we have one coming up in this November. A huge one, Double H, that may actually not even make it across the finish line, because it's that convoluted of a project and it's more political than it is anything else.
And I'll be honest with you right now, with the last legislative session, we had a large conversation with the administration and local governments around land use, right? And there's a lot of bad feelings around that. I'm not sure I want to go to ballot with local governments and having the governor supporting passenger rail. He does. He loves himself passenger rail. He wants us to go to the ballot in 2024. Bless his heart. I don't know if I want that. Right? So there's a lot of politics that still need to be decided on all of this. And that's where I think I bring my expertise to the table, where people are a lot smarter than me and will start figuring out the financing of it all. That's with the finance and lawyer degrees. Anything else about the corridor identification development? I think that kind of gives you a broad sense of why we're excited about the opportunity moving forward, and we have these possible funding available for us, and so facilitating those conversations. So where are we all right now? This is a lot of conversations. Feasibility, district service planning, financial strategies, all right here. So that's where we are right now. Environmental reports, NEPA, construction, opening day, standard routes, all moving into the future. Honestly, best case scenario, best case scenario, 10, 15 years, assuming that we pass ballot measure, we're able to get trains, everything goes great. CIDP program helps us pay for stuff all the way up into here. Another interesting thing about this is it helps pay, if we choose Amtrak, there's fees and costs associated with Amtrak service coming in. They bring the benefit, but we also need to pay for some of those benefits. State-sponsored services, right? The CIDP program, being accepted into that, pays for a bulk of those services in the front, and then over the next 5 years reduces that, but it allows the state to kind of build up into that opportunity and paying for some of those, defraying the costs. So that's another little perk of that.
When do you anticipate that you'll be able to bring forth NEPA plan on this, and how long will that take?
That's a great question. So hopefully immediately, if not before, our service development plan is finished. So at the end of next year, we expect to have a clear picture of what will be part of NEPA. So that's unclear right now. That some may be CADX, some may be the higher level, whatever. CDOT is helping out in conversation right now about how to expedite the NEPA process. And there's some possibilities for bundling or do this or do a PEL first and all this. I don't pretend to understand all of it, but the expectation is it could be, hopefully, if expedited, and FRA, who has expressed willingness to be flexible, a year or two with the NEPA process, and then the planning could be done and we could start building.
What about an EIS on this too?
Can you answer that? I don't know enough.
EIS is the end result of any NEPA study, so it's inevitable, just a matter of what level of NEPA do we need. I think their goal with the service development plan is to do kind of what they call a PEL, which is a preliminary environmental linkages study. So trying to preload as much as they can so it's a shorter EIS process. A year, 18 months.
It's fast.
That's why we're looking at that 2026.
I mean,
As soon as.
yeah.
Well, and we can go to the ballot, I think, before NEPA's finished. We just need to have a very clear narrative for it. I don't know if that's the answer, but, to your point.
But if you're going to the ballot, wouldn't you rather be told as a citizen, we did all our planning, now we're ready to construct, we don't want to pay for planning. So we'd like to have NEPA thoroughly underway. We can show that to her.
And one of the things that we have noticed, NEPA, especially on this part of the state, we get a ton of community groups, representatives. We have been working with Opinion Canyon for quite some time, and I tell you one thing, especially when the federal government comes and does a study, government period, the NEPA process is going to get that much more skill to Q&A and open sessions, so allow the time, I think, and again, depending on what sectors of the corridor has to be completed, it is going to be a very sensitive subject. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a group from Denver, that actually read a statement, never heard it in my life, but the statement was that we acknowledge I forget what the actual title of the statement was, but now, knowing that this land was populated by all these groups, to include, this was part of Old Mexico. So your NEPA study is going to carry you and actually through very thorough Q&A perspective.
Absolutely.
We've in some of the meetings that we have had with our counterparts, as I mentioned, with the federal government, boy, those get pretty interesting.
I understand that 1,000%. Our hope is that we will be doing NEPA in those like Burnham Yard, the bigger projects, and the sightings won't be as comprehensive or require such comprehensive. That's how, I don't know if that's going to happen. FRA has signaled they'll be willing to, take a look at what it is that we're proposing. We'll see. I hope we don't have to go through an extensive, long-term process on NEPA in order to do the siting. I hope we don't have to do that. And nobody has, so I hope we don't. I know you guys are looking at each other like, good luck. I'll be honest with you, I would have been doing the side glance as well with anybody else who was, when you were on the commission, I was side glancing all over the place. There was no money available. There was no political will. There was no district. There was no federal political capital to place in this. Our governor didn't care about it.
And we struggled just to get the little bit of money that we got, just to get something.
Yeah. The difference between then and now, because of that infrastructure bill and the availability of money, has changed the dialogue in many circles to where I've heard things where I never thought I'd hear freight rails say, BNSF, yeah, we recognize passenger rails coming onto our, we recognize that, we'll work with you. Right? That's why I'm like, okay. UP didn't say that, but BNSF. But FRA knows that this infrastructure bill opened up the floodgates, and there's like 50 some odd, I hear, I don't know, I haven't counted them, but a large number of people interested, as you can imagine, in the CIDP process. If not anything, it's just to get $500,000, right? So FRA recognizes that, they're staffing up for it, they don't have a choice, unless they want to look like complete idiots and mismanage this thing from step one. So.
But that $500,000 has to be spent on the relative expenses to the project.
You know, Amtrak has always been on board with this, as well as DNSF. UP was kind of on the sidelines. Where do they sit now? How do they?
On the sidelines.
They're still on the sidelines?
They're, and I haven't engaged directly with them. There's not much to engage yet, and plus they all have their heads buried in Burnham Yard right now, and talking about the complexities of Burnham Yard, all the wide variety of different possibilities on how to relocate the rail in Burnham Yard. And that's a big time suck for them right now. So I'm letting them have that conversation. But like we talked about, another interesting thing is BN just came out and submitted to us their 10 top projects along the corridor. Some aren't on the corridor, but they're like, if we're gonna have a conversation, let's have a conversation. That is a proactive step that I haven't heard freight rail take in the past. So I'm under no illusion that it's gonna be a yellow brick road leading to a passenger rail, but some of those dynamics have changed because of money, because of availability.
Well, and I think I want to just commend Commissioner Lopez because he has the pulse of this community, and I hope your board entirely from north to south is doing the same thing as he does. You know, walk the streets of your community, know when you go on a ballot measure. That is so important. And how every one of those representatives that are pro this campaign, they need to get the payment. They need to be knocking on doors and explaining, because here comes the big money with all the negative proposals. And sometimes, boy, I wish you the best, and we're watching and applauding you and cheerleading you on. But it's a heavy lift.
It's a huge heavy lift.
And then, you know, here's the thing is the tax. There's gonna be a point in time that we are gonna have to say no more, regardless of what benefits. And I also encourage you to study the socioeconomic sectors of your communities. We got 2 counties here in the southern part of the state that, you know, we're getting by. When you look at AMI, it's pretty tough.
Hurt, and it's difficult when you have a district that has the state's richest county down to, those that are not that prosperous. So we need to find the balance between it. I'm not one to just cater to the haves. It's a whole district. To your point, it's the whole district. I don't want to have a regional conversation about this. It's not about a south versus north. It's not about, let's build a rail line that benefits the front range, and it's not about the south. And if we can't do it, then let's move the needle so that the next effort can maybe take it on. But we're a long way from that. Sure.
So what I've advocated to this board is exactly that if we don't get this done from board to board, and Dana Escar was on that call too, and she reiterated that as well, this will become a giant Jenga puzzle and fall apart. So we have to be very careful how we move forward with the taxing, the ballot measure, and you're right, people said that we're just being taxed to death on everything. So how do we sell this possible revenue, income, and put a positive on it? So we have to show the benefit of rail. And you and I have had many conversations. We were both having issues with that bill that came through, and we eliminated eminent domain in the executive session, which was in that bill. Remember that a couple years ago? And that happened, and now we're at the next step. So how do we get to the next level with taxing people, and we're having a benefit to the tax, and that's how we're going to have to move forward with it. Because a lot of the taxes we have in the state of Colorado, those rural communities don't have benefit to. Or they withdraw our funding, or they lower what they're trying to do with HH. So what happens up in Denver really hurts a lot in the rural community. So how does Front Range Rail going to be a benefit for rural Colorado?
You know what?
And that's how we get to that.
And if anything, that is it right there. Because the impact to one is not the same. The decision is made in Denver, but that is worth $1 million right there. If we can take that messaging that this Front Range Rail is going to benefit all, not just the neighbors up north. I mean, and I think that's going to be the way of finessing the dialogue, but selling it to constituents.
Well, and the perfect example of that this year was the EV tax credit bill that was passed. They passed this EV tax credit bill. That tax comes out of the state as a whole. There's nowhere in House District 47 that you're going to be able to benefit from EV tax credits. You don't have the infrastructure in the first place. The second place, it just isn't feasible yet in rural Colorado. So here's your tax dollars going to tax credits for e-scooters and for electric vehicles, and it's a redistribution of wealth from rural Colorado to the city, and we got to make sure that doesn't keep happening, because it does happen at the Capitol all the time.
So how do we sell that to the district as a whole, possibly with the tourism that you spoke of earlier? Now you've seen a reversal on the weekends of trains. How do we get our ranchers, our people in rural Colorado, up in Larimer, Weld County as well, to benefit from tax dollars, dollars that we spent in the community from people outside of the community? So how do we leverage that as a board and as a selling point to promote this rail? That's one of the topics that we'll probably have to bring before the board. But again, this is a rail that we have to sell to the constituents of all of our counties up and down the districts. How do we do that? You hit the nail on the head earlier. BNSF's on board now. Why? Money. How do you sell this ballot measure to the rural communities? Show them the impact of dollars. Mayor Rico said it earlier, people going to Albuquerque, or Albuquerque can come into Trinidad, and vice versa to Denver. Sal Pace has been an advocate for this, saying we just don't want to think of Cheyenne, Wyoming to Trinidad. We want to think all the way to LA or to Chicago, or however the Southwest Chief goes that way. So it's not just Weld County to Los Angeles County. So we have to have a broader picture to our constituents, and how do we sell it? Show them the benefit of the taxation that we're going to give them, and how much more can Los Angeles and Huerfano County and the city of Trinidad and the city of Walsenburg make on sales tax for bringing those people to the communities. Dr. Epper was just asking me now of future for this rail, how long it's going to be, because she has students in Walsenburg that would have a hard time getting to Trinidad State College. And I think Jennifer should follow up the bus thing for now. Maybe that might be a benefit for her students now. But the enrollment to Trinidad State, she said it should probably go up at least 5 to 10%, and that's huge. So from rural, people living in Walsenburg and Pueblo that can't afford to go to CU Pueblo, they come to Trinidad State. So the benefits will have to be included in the whole perspective as this board moves forward before any ballot measure is brought forward. But that's why this is the start of the first town hall type meeting here with Andy doing a tour and Chrissy across the entire district, and that's what we'll have to do a year or two from down the road before we do a ballot measure. And the board will probably have to do something as a presentation as a whole of the benefit of the Front Range Rail.
I think the key thing you said, Commissioner, was is the honesty and the clarity. And that's what people want nowadays with their government. I think that's key, and I think you hit the nail on the head. People want to know that they're not being sold a false bill of goods. They want to know that there isn't going to be a trick pony down the road, and they want to know that if they vote for this, it isn't going to be the, would you call it the A train or, the money. I mean, because we have an issue we have a piece of property in her county right now that's kind of how it is. And I mean, you know, people are touchy about those things. And I appreciate your willingness to make sure that, you know, that happens along with Andy and everybody else, because, you know, people need to know what's gonna happen, and they need to know the good, the bad, the ugly of everything. Thank you for that.
And I won't ban, you know that.
Oh, I know you will.
Well, I just wanted to say, I think that this is an excellent move, and as long as you keep coming back when you hit different, you know, milestones, as long as you don't change the tune, I think that you're gonna be well received all the way around.
I appreciate that.
So, I mean, I think the transparency is the right.
I think that's kind of what
I think the other thing you gotta remember is that this
Thank you,
overall thing
Representative.
Thank you, sir. It was good seeing you. Likewise. If you need anything from me, call me, sir.
is that this is a plan, and like all plans,
Yeah.
it tends to move.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
I always say that to people. I'm like, you know, like going to the ballot. I got a 4-year plan going to the ballot. I can get us there if everything goes well. If everything goes well, it'll pass. But nothing ever really goes as planned. This isn't going to go as planned. It will change, right? I don't know what's going to happen in the politics in the next couple of years, right? So if in 2 years the Republicans take the White House or something, right, there goes the funding. We need to be ready for that. Right? We need to be ready to pivot. We need to be ready to come back to you all and be like, well, guess what? This is where we're at now. Things have changed or something like that. But thank you all very much for taking the time to come to listen to me today. I am grateful. But I hope that we can continue having the conversations. Obviously, the commissioner is on the board. Bug him. Right, with anything that you have, seriously bug him.
Can you give us his phone number?
He's probably the one person that everybody has a phone number.
Well, that's how earlier, I was just throw it away.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you. We have for you the fact sheet.